Mr. Mayor. When I was in primary school back in South Korea, I remember every day we used to travel to school in the bus, me and my brother. We were only about 8, 9 years old, just two of us. And every morning you get on the bus, you get this tear gas everywhere. And on one day I was in the bus, in the back of the bus, sitting on the seat, and we used to have the university student who jumped in the bus, and rapidly followed by some soldiers and some police officers, and they were bashing them up in front of my eyes. And that I never lost that memory. It's quite a horrific memory. What they were doing at the time was fighting for the human rights. And in that period of 2-3 weeks, 1,000 Korean university students died. And through their life, Korea gained democracy. The United Nations later on called this day a democratic uprising of Gwangju. Going forward in 2000, back then, Korea was actually fighting. People were dying to fight for democracy. What's happening in June 2019 in Hong Kong? They're not fighting for democracy. They're fighting to keep democracy. Millions of people gathered to protest in Hong Kong. You see the banners. Stop annexation of Hong Kong's democratic rights. Stop China extradition. Extradition law equals Texas chainsaw. Fall of Hong Kong. Basic law trashed. No legal kidnapping of Hong Kong people to China. This is all based on public protest against a controversial extradition law. It's called Fugitive Offenders and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Amendment Bill 2019. So that law empowers the Hong Kong government to extradite Hong Kong residents and visitors who breaches one of 37 criminal codes to China for a trial. Chinese judicial system is well known for being deeply politicized. Right to fair trial is often chronically denied, and the defendants often face ill treatment and torture. There are many residents living in Ryde who are from Hong Kong nationals or have dual citizenship. There are many other Chinese descendants living in Ryde with ties in China. So according to 2016 statistics, in fact, 4.7% of population in Eastwood was born in Hong Kong, and further 25.3% of population in Eastwood is from Chinese heritage. It is possible that the proposed extradition law could affect the rights of their residents who plan to visit Hong Kong in the future. I've spoken to many Chinese Rydians who have strong interest in human rights, and they said they will be avoiding traveling to Hong Kong or China due to fear of prosecution as a result of their stance against Chinese Communist Party and pro-democracy. So, councillors, I really appreciate if you can support this motion. It's a simple motion seeking Mayor to write to various parties in support of democratic movement in Hong Kong to speak in the interest of residents living in Ryde who are from Hong Kong or Chinese heritage. Sorry, on that list, sorry, this is the wrong, I gave it the wrong one. Could you please delete the Chinese embassy in General City? I'm very sorry about that. Yeah, that one needs to delete.
Can I suggest you leave? Why would we leave it?
All right, we'll just leave. Yep. So Carrie Lam is the executive committee manager of Hong Kong. She's like a prime minister of Hong Kong at the moment, who will be making a final decision on this extradition law. Maria Penn is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and she came out publicly in support of opposing extradition law. We so did the Penny Wong, the Shadow Minister. Amnesty International working around the clock at the moment supporting the students and in Hong Kong, and that's the motion. I really appreciate your support.
Thank you, Councillor Kim. Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was very honoured to be part of a council last year that supported Councillor Yadelian's motion to show our support for the Republic of Artsakh. It just comes through my mind as Councillor Kim was talking that he comes from a country that was, I think, for around about 35 years occupied by another country. Democracy is an incredibly precious thing. I think in this country we tend to take it a bit too much, well, not too much, but we tend to take it for granted. In that area we've had it fairly easy, unless perhaps you're an Indigenous person. I think it's democracy. I think that Churchill, who was supposed to have said something like democracy is the best of a bad bunch of systems or something or other. I just feel like it's the sort of thing we need to be constantly vigilant about. All around the world we see certain countries move into other countries. I'm not going to name them. I'm not going to do that to the council tonight. But we all know who they are. And it's very important that we stand up and make a stand in support of democracy. And so I wholeheartedly commend Councillor Kim's motion tonight.
Councillor Zhao.
Mr. Mayor, first of all, I would like to thank Councillor Kim and thank Councillor Gordon for their concerns and the idea about this motion. Well, I'm a first-generation immigrant. Originally, I'm from China, so I have the least understanding among all the councillors for City of Ryde, I have to admit. But my only strength is that I understand the Chinese community a little bit better than most of the people here. So I would like to make a friendly suggestion as an amendment or optimization. Mr. Mayor, am I following the right procedure?
Yeah, you can
Okay.
propose an amendment, and then if
Sure.
Councillor Kim's happy with the amendment, he can accept that, yeah.
The only wording I want to change is that we oppose extradition law, and I would like to change to, I'll read slowly, we support the rule of law in Hong Kong and the independence of its judiciary. The reason, yep, that's it. We support the rule of law in Hong Kong and the independence of its judiciary. It's judiciary. Yep. JUDICIARY.
Just before I call for a seconder, Councillor Zhao, that seems a decent amendment. Are you happy to accept that, Councillor Kim?
Sorry?
Are you happy to accept that as an amendment for the sake of, I guess, unanimity on this?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to put those two together in one.
Okay. All right. So you're not happy to accept it exactly as it is?
Amendment's been seconded.
Okay, the amendment's been seconded. Thank you, Councillor Majali. So we have an amendment on the screen.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, can I speak about the amendment?
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mujali. The reason I want to make this change is that give us an example. Just letting everyone know that the extradition law is deferred in Hong Kong, so which means it's not decided by the Hong Kong Parliament. So to me, it feels like we say we are not happy with Sydney City Council's 2020 event budget. Like if they haven't decided, and if it's not us, we should leave the decision to the people there and to the people who are elected by the Hong Kong people and representing them in the parliament there to make a decision. And the reason is simple. Thank you.
Who's next? Councillor Yadelian.
Yeah, I support the sentiment of both the motion and the amendment. I like that we shouldn't interfere in other countries' internal affairs, but we should support anything democratic rights of those people. If the democratic will of the people of Hong Kong is to refuse this bill, we should just say it plainly that we support their rights. And I like that. I don't know why we removed the Chinese writing to the Chinese Consul General Embassy. I would like that it gets incorporated in. I know it looks like a bit political. Might create a political issues, but that's not our problem. That's foreign affairs deals with it. But I like that the Chinese government knows about it. That we support democracy in Hong Kong. That's what the most important part of it. And don't interfere in Hong Kong's internal affair.
Councillor Kim.
Mr. Mayor, this amendment is really good in principle. It's just something that you read in a textbook. We support the rule of law in Hong Kong, yes. We support independence, yes, we do all that. We are supposed to, yeah, the reason we're putting up this motion, the subject matter of this is this unfair extradition law that's been placed. If there was no extradition law, Hong Kong was fine. You had an independent judicial system, you had a legal system almost equal to Sharia, and there was no issues. The reason we have this motion up is because of the extradition law. And if we remove the subject matter of the motion, I don't quite understand what this motion, resolution will prepare to what was the purpose of the resolution?
I'll take that as against the amendment. And Councillor Clifton.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually just want to, would you mind popping it back up again? I just want to put in a minor amendment in that we oppose violent protest. I'm not entirely sure if it's not rather we support the right to protest, if they're happy to make that. Peaceful protest, yes.
No, we support the right to protest.
The right to protest.
Councillor Kim and Zhao, I think that's meant to be the intent of these two, rather than opposing protest.
I think it's just a language
that we
issue.
support the right to protest, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. If that's accepted, thank you.
Both of them. It's been copied across, yeah.
The right to protest, thank you. For both of them then.
And that, yes, I think that makes a bit more sense. Well picked
And,
up.
sorry, I was just going to say too, if Councillor Kim is going ahead with his, I'd just like to make a small amendment in that we oppose this extradition law rather than just general extradition laws. If that's accepted by Councillor Kim.
Okay.
Thank you.
All picked up. All right, where are we up to? Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Mr.
Speaking for the amendment or against the amendment?
I think I'm speaking against the amendment, but I'd just like to understand firstly, the two motions with the exception of the extradition point, are they different now? Or are they now the same except for that?
Just that one point. They're the same.
That's
apart
the
from
one
that
point.
one point, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, no, I would like to speak against that amendment only briefly because I agree with you, Councillor Kim, entirely that the reality is that the entire nucleus for this demonstration, which has been peaceful and largely silent, has been the basis of that very piece of proposed legislation. And whilst I recognise that it's been deferred, and perhaps for the semantics of getting to some sort of agreement on this, rather than a catch-all phrase, which is to say that we oppose this extradition law, I mean, perhaps we could say that we stand alongside, or we support the people of Hong Kong and their protest against this issue or something like that. If we are reticent to take a position on another country's legislation, but I think it should be in there. I think it's important. That's the basis of all of this, and I think taking on what Councillor Gordon said about democracy generally, and our role to promote that and advocate for that. This incident and ongoing state of affairs in Hong Kong is not the only circumstance like it in the world. I mean, just last night, People Power spoke in Turkey in the mayoral election, and People Power will speak in Bougainville in a matter of months where they vote on their independence. And I hope that those issues will also be dealt with in a peaceful and fair and transparent manner. So I think that if we're going to be true to taking a position on this, then we should be very clear about what it is that we stand with the people on, and that is the extradition bill. So I'd like to oppose that amendment, and if we need to change some of the language in the motion, then so be it, to make it more agreeable to everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Councillor Majali.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'm speaking in favour of the amendment moved by Councillor Zhao, and I thank Councillor Zhao for moving that, because I think we're in an extraordinary position here in the city of Ryde when we start passing judgment on other countries' laws, other nation states. All of a sudden, I'll bring 5 motions condemning laws I don't like in other nations. We'll write to those nations. Of course, you don't have to like laws of other countries, but we don't live there. We live in Australia, and we elect our governments. We recently elected a state government. We recently elected a federal government. And we elect them to make the laws for our country, and we'll have a chance to pass judgment on those in 3 and 4 years respectively. But to sit here and to pass judgment on other countries, I agree with Councillor Kim, in terms of supporting democracy, in terms of supporting the right to protest. Absolutely. Of course we do, and you said this comes out of a textbook. Well, that's right, because these are Australian values: democracy, the right to protest, the right to do it peacefully. Everyone here has different views, but we're entitled to that in Australia, and that's one of the best things about this country, that we can have differing opinions, but we can do that in a peaceful way. We have transparent elections, and that's where you speak. You speak at the ballot box. But we elect governments to make laws. And just as other countries have the right to elect their governments and make the laws for their countries. But for us to come here, are we going to condemn countries in the Middle East or in Africa or the United States or any other country? If we don't like their laws, do we come to the City of Ryde now every council meeting and oppose their laws? No, let's do what we can here. We're the City of Ryde. We got elected to represent our constituents, and absolutely, we need to support them in their rights locally, so that they can have their say, and they can have their right to democracy, their right to protest, their view, their right to pass judgment on us as a council and as individual councillors. That's their right. They elected us. They put us here, and we need to support them to do it for us. But I don't think it's our place to start telling other countries how they should be operating and passing judgment on their laws. I'm sure there's plenty of people in other countries that wouldn't agree with all our laws here in Australia. But again, they live there and we live here. And in Australia, we vote for our parliamentarians, our elected officials, as we have the right to do. And we have the right, we're privileged, in fact, to have the right to vote and to have transparent elections and democracy and the right to protest. We're extraordinarily privileged in this country to have that right. So I fully support Councillor Zhao's amendment.
Councillor Majali, I'd just like to remind you that this council has a long history of advocacy on foreign affairs. Councillor Delian first moved a motion in regards to the recognition of the Armenian genocide, and recently in this term of council, I think it was a unanimous vote to recognise or to advocate for the recognition of the independence of Artsakh, which is a nation state in Armenia. So we have had a history in advocacy on foreign affairs, and both the motion and the amendment continue that tradition. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to oppose the amendment, and I'd like to support the original motion as proposed by Councillor Kim. And I'd suggest, Councillor Kim, you may like to once again include that bullet point around writing to the Ambassador and the Consul General, but I won't formally amend that. I'll leave that to your decision, if you will. My reasoning for opposing the amendment and supporting the motion is that the core issue at stake here is the extradition law. And I think we do need to have a firm view on that matter. It is important for our constituency in the City of Ryde, in a deeply multicultural community, where I recognise that many of my neighbours, my peers, friends, even party members return to Hong Kong and China. and have a deep abiding interest in this matter, and therefore are placed at risk from this law themselves. So I do consider that this law does impact our local residents. They may not be citizens, or they may be dual citizens, but the law certainly does impact Hong Kong Chinese, or mainland Chinese for that matter, who frequently return home, who will always continue to do that when there are a grandparents' generation overseas, and that is typical of all people of all backgrounds, who, through our immigration policies, tend to find a first generation may migrate, but the grandparents' generation may not be able to do so for whatever reason, because one or many children remain in the homeland and some emigrate. So I think it is a key issue for us to consider. At its core, it is all about the extradition law, and I do think we ought to value the democracy and value the freedoms that they enjoy in Hong Kong, and stand firm in asserting our view on the extradition law, and therefore I oppose the amendment and affirm the original motion. Perhaps with your amendment, Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. We've had speakers 2 for, 2 against, 2 for, 2 against. Councillor Delian, if...
Yeah, I'm opposing the amendment and
Okay,
supporting the original motion. The only difference I want to make is stress that the reason we don't bring all the international problems here, because it doesn't affect our residents, right? It affects our Chinese background community, our Armenian community. That's why I bring all those stuff, because it affects us as locals, and as our residents contact us because of those subjects. That's why we bring those issues. Of course, we all support, we have moral duty to support any democracy anywhere and be against any type of genocide in any corner of the world. But because it's not affecting our community here, that's why we don't bring everything. That's we leave it to our federal government to do it. That's why I'm opposing the amendment and supporting the original.
Thank you, Councillor Delian. Councillor Kim, do you want to exercise your right of reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would appreciate a full unanimous support of this council on this matter, because this is a matter that goes to the heart of residents living in Ryde. Now, I have spoken with many Chinese residents, whether they're from Malaysia, Hong Kong, or from mainland China, or, as a matter of fact, Indonesian Chinese as well. And they tell me, I will not be able to go to Hong Kong because I have protested against extradition law. I will have to ask my mother to come and visit me now. There's another resident who tells me, if those guys think that they can say anything against Chinese government and get away with it, they are stupid. They shouldn't have kept their mouth shut if they wanted to travel to Hong Kong or China. And I have Dr. Peter Wong, who is an OAM, former MLC of New South Wales Parliament, and I spoke to him a couple of days ago, and he tells me just about everyone have done in business with China can be hit with this law. Even I will not think about travelling to another country via Hong Kong. And I spoke with another person this morning, and they tell me they actually have asked them, I've got this motion I'm thinking about putting through, can you come and help me? And guess what they tell me? They said, no, I don't want to do it, because I got my relatives, I got my mother living in China. Why would I want to risk their life? Although people are not saying, coming forth, maybe telling you that they're opposing this, but there is a lot of sentiment of fear amongst people living in Ryde. And I think that's probably the reason why me, not being Chinese, being Korean, am speaking about this issue, because I know it won't affect my family.
Thank you, Councillor Kim. We'll vote on the amendment in the name of Zhao and Majali. First.
That's 2 votes for and 9 against.
The amendment is lost. We'll vote on the motion in the name of Kim and Gordon.
It's unanimous, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. We now move to Mayoral Minute 13/19, just recognition of 40 years of contribution to the